Well, Merry Christmas again. We have a different kind of thing today than we normally do because we've invited our the elementary age kids to be with us. So, and it's Christmas morning. So my gift to you is it won't be as long a sermon as it normally is. I know that's going to disappoint a few of you there, maybe towards the back, but that's all right. That's all right. I feel like I need to do it, as a gift. So a little shorter. And then in the middle of it, we're going to sing a couple of other Christmas songs. So I know not everybody digs all the Christmas songs, but I think they're pretty cool, and it's kind of fun to hit them this time of year. So we'll be doing that too. I've been over the last couple of months, like you, especially over the last month, thinking real hard about different gifts that I need to get for different people and trying to shop for different people. And certain people on my list are always hard to shop for. And it was kind of a weird conversation that I had with some people in my family who told me that I was hard to shop for. And I didn't think that I was. I thought that I have hobbies, and you could go in those hobbies. Yeah, but what do you want specifically? And I would say, I don't know. And they'd say, there, right there, what you're doing. What do you want? Tell us what you want. And I had a hard time doing it. They say, yeah, you can just go on Amazon there, make us a list. And it's not that I couldn't find things on Amazon that I might want. I mean, you hunt around for it. You'll sure find stuff. But I mean, before I did that, I didn't have anything I really wanted. And for the most part, if I really do want something, I just go get it or I save up for it. And if it was more than I could save up for, I'm not sure I want my kids buying that anyway. I wouldn't feel right taking it. So it became one of those deals where I'm just trying to toss out stuff. What do you want? Well, I need a belt, stuff like that. And I couldn't think of anything, and they would get so frustrated with me because everybody wants to give a present that makes the other person go, like I never thought that you would remember this, and you're so excited. Most of the gifts that I get now are tied to my wife anyway. They're not really for me. They'll be. I got you and Julia something. Oh, great! It's throw pillows for the bed. So that's what we wanted, and it's a lot of those kind of things. But so then it's fine, and that's fine. That's part of being a grown adult and a man. It's not really for me, right? It's not really for me. It's not really what I get out of it. But it's an interesting time. And what I've been thinking about getting ready for this sermon is that whole process of gift giving. What do you give to somebody who already has everything? What do you give to somebody if you want to make a good impression? Because that's what the story today is about, the Bible story. And I had somebody tell me after the first service, it's hard, and it is hard at Christmas because there's really only 2 or 3 Christmas stories that we go through every year, and you feel some obligation to hit these things every year. And in the story today, if you've been in church very long at all, you've heard before. And so I probably won't tell you anything that you don't know as far as the story, but I wanted to go through the story first and just kind of establish that as a foundation, and then we'll sing a few more songs, and then I want to make some observations about it if I can. So the story is in Matthew chapter 2, and you can follow along online if you want, or you can on the screen here, either one. Doesn't matter. It says in Matthew chapter 2, verse 1, that after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem. They asked, "Where's the one who's been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it came up, and we were here to worship him." And when Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and the whole city was disturbed with him. Now, we don't know a lot about King Herod from the Bible. We know a few things, but not a lot. But we know a lot about King Herod from other historians of that time period and archaeology and things like that. And Herod was a pretty bloody king, especially as he got older. Herod it was kind of like Game of Thrones there in Judea. He was scared somebody was coming after his position, and he killed a bunch of people. Killed one of his wives, killed several of his children, a lot of friends and associates. He was just worried that somebody was going to come and take it from him, and he was all his time on the lookout for whoever would claim to be king of the Jews. So when these fellas show up, well, actually, it doesn't even say they're fellas. It just says Magi. We don't know how many there were. We don't know what their gender was. We don't know much about them other than they're magicians. Magi, they study things like that, stars and dreams and fortune telling, kind of like psychics. Other than they show up and now they're looking for a king of the Jews, and that probably would have shook Herod up. That's why it says he was disturbed. And the reason why the whole city is disturbed with him is because when King Herod gets disturbed, people start to die. The other thing that Herod was nervous about was an invasion from the east. Now, he wasn't worried about his west because that was the Mediterranean Sea on the west of Israel there, and Rome was on his west. But on the east, where Persia used to be, there was an empire called the Parthian Empire, and Rome hadn't conquered it yet, and he was scared of invaders coming from the east. And so now you have these magi, and they're from the east, and he's got some fortresses built up there watching about it, and they're from the east, and they're looking for a new king of the Jews. And so it's kind of scratching all the different itches that King Herod would need to really go off the deep end. And so he's troubled. And these magi, they say, we saw his star. And there's a lot of study about that. In fact, there's even Johannes Kepler in the 1600s did a whole thing where he thought it was two different planets coming close together. There have been archaeologists found that Chinese astrologers reported some sort of a supernova about the right time. There's a lot of things it could be. I kind of think it's supernatural. I don't think it's going to be something that'll be easily proven. I think God makes it happen because he wants these guys to come, these magi to come from wherever they came. That star's been up there for a long time, and nobody really noticed it in Jerusalem. And if they did notice it, nobody knew what to do with it. I mean, nobody thought, oh, a star, we should go do something. But these magi, off in the distance, and they might have come from Babylon or from hundreds of miles away, they've come all this way because to them, that star represented something. And it's interesting. This is all interesting to me. I know it won't be as interesting to some of you. And like I said, I'm promising a short sermon. Well, I just want to blow through this. But it's interesting to me because these are the kinds of people that the Old Testament said, be careful about people like that. Be careful about people who are all the time looking at the stars. Be careful about people who are fortune-telling. Be careful about people who are trying to read the future and read the signs. God says, I won't work that way. And yet here, he's working that way. And he's calling the very kind of people you think he wouldn't call, and he's asking them to come and take a look. Now, last week we looked at the shepherds, and they're the poor, and they're the low rung, and they're the people you wouldn't think he'd call in either. Well, these guys aren't poor, they're rich, but they're foreigners, and they're probably don't worship God, and they're on the other side of the spectrum. He said, well, come on in. I want you to see this thing. And the point of all these Christmas stories is that God calls everybody in. He wants everybody to see what he's up to. Well, King Herod, when he gets these guys in their question, he calls together his chief priests and his teachers. And the chief priests would have been the Sadducees, and the teachers would have been the Pharisees, and they hated each other. And he calls them all together, and he asks them, where's the Messiah to be born? And they said, well, it's in Bethlehem, in Judea, they replied. And this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judea, are by no means least amongst the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. And so Herod calls the wise men back, calls the magi back. He gets the exact time. When did you see this star? And wants to know a little bit about it and what's going on. And they tell him, and he says, okay, well, here's what we do. He says, you guys go find him, this baby, and then come back and tell me where he is, and I'll go worship him. And we know from the story later on that he's lying, that he has no intention of doing that. He wants to kill him. But because what Herod did, that was the kind of guy he was. But he again, this is interesting to me because now the star's been pointed out, you would think that he could follow the star, but he doesn't know how. God is calling these wise men or these magi. They got their secret ways of figuring stuff out. They've got their approaches that they can see the star. They understand it in a way that Herod can't, and so he has to rely on them. You guys go check it out. Then come tell me about it. And so they agree. Now Bethlehem is only about 6 miles away from Jerusalem. It's closer to Jerusalem than we are to Mitchell. It wouldn't have been a hard trip for those guys to go down and check it out if they would have wanted to. Herod and those the chief priests, any of them could have went and checked it out. Any of them could have went and saw what was going on, but none of them do. Herod, because he's afraid if he goes too close that the wise men will get scared about him and he won't figure it out. And the priests apparently aren't interested. They've been waiting for a Messiah, but now this might be the Messiah. Now they just have better things to do. And I think that's interesting too, and I could spend longer on it, but again, short sermon, I won't. But this notion that God puts the same call out to everybody, right? Same star is in the sky, the same call out goes to everybody, and not everybody hears it. For whatever reason. Maybe for some people it's kind of boring, and I not got time for that right now. For some people they're kind of busy. Maybe for some people, I've heard stuff like this before. I don't need it. Thank you, but no thank you. And some people just think it doesn't mean anything. Well, it's interesting, but it doesn't mean anything. And I think I think that whole thing's how it always works. I don't think the message always connects, and I think that's how it goes. And that's how it went with me. I didn't always hear it. And when it finally did click, it was kind of powerful. And that's what's going on here. Well, anyway, the wise men, the magi, after they'd heard from the king, they went on their way, and the star, what they saw rise up in the east, it went ahead of them, and it stopped over the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they were overjoyed. In fact, what it says literally is they rejoiced with exceeding joy. They were joy on top of joy. They had joy, as much joy as a person could have. This is a 10 on 10 scale of joy. And I don't know what that looks like for you, but I think of watching football yesterday, the guys in 10 degrees who were shirtless out in the football game and cheering on their team. Nothing but paint between them and the Lord, and they're out there, come on, whoever, you can do this. It's that kind of thing. Maybe you may even picture the wise men walking into Bethlehem with their chest painted, if that helps you to get a picture of what it would look like. Just joy on top of joy. Right? And I think it's worth, and no short sermon, but it's worth thinking about, well, what would have made them so excited? Because there's no record that these guys become Christians. They go and they see the baby and they give their gifts and then they go home. There's no record that they change anything about themselves. What is it about this baby that's getting them all so revved up? I think that's interesting. And then really, as much as anything else, I want to think on that. I think that's an interesting thing. What is it about this? If you told me, hey, the answer to all your problems is right next door. And I go next door and I open the door and there's a 2-year-old, I'm going to say, well, is there anything else here, right? Because no matter what answer this little 2-year-old is to my problems, it ain't going to help today or next week or next year. This baby is going to have to become an adult. I might have to wait 10 or 20 years. Or 30 years to see any return on an investment like this. If I see a baby in a manger, if I see a baby in a house, it's not going to be enough. That's cool. So what is it about this that makes them overjoyed? Well, and to all that, you got to know a little bit of history, and it won't take long. But let's think through some things. For the Jews and the king of the Jews, there was a prophecy about that. There was an old man named Abraham, and one starry night he's outside, and he looks up at the stars. And if you've ever been in the desert, seeing the stars is a completely different phenomenon than it is here in Indiana. You go out in the desert, and there's no ambient light around, and you can see stars horizon to horizon. It really is powerful. And that's what Abraham would have saw. And he's out there in the desert, and he says, look up at the sky, and there's stars. It's just blanket. The whole sky is blanketed with stars. And he says, count them, God does, if you can. He says, that's what your family is going to be like, Abraham. He says, all those stars represent children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-great-grandchildren and all of your descendants. And one of those stars, he says, is going to bless the whole world. And that prophecy became known. It became something that defined the Jewish people, that one day a star would come up out of Jacob, out of Abraham, out of Isaac. One day a star would rise up, and that would change everything. And these wise men, these magi, are apparently tying into that thing. Okay, well, here we go. We got the star again, and look what's going on. But then there's other stuff going on, too. A lot of the Roman world believed that the stars were used to symbolize what God's will was on earth. And even though the Bible doesn't totally back that up, there was even, when Julius Caesar died, there was a comet in the sky the summer after Julius Caesar died, and people said, see, that's Caesar going up to heaven. And this notion that if you were really good on earth, you could become a god in heaven, that was a myth that was told in a lot of different cultures. And so this idea that the stars would reveal it to us, right? And so you have these wise men, and they're looking for the stars to reveal it to us. And there's this star going to come out of Abraham, going to change everything. And then they get to see the baby, and they're overjoyed. Not because this solves everything. It doesn't. But God's foot is in the door. The seed is in the ground. The bread is in the oven. It's just a matter of time. It's not anything yet, but it's going to happen. You just got to wait for it. This notion of Christian hope works that way. It's It's not just optimism. Optimism is a good thing. It's a good quality for people to have, but it's not just optimism. Optimism says, look at the bright side, even when there isn't a bright side, and tries to get you to change your emotions in the moment. A couple of years ago, on a day pretty much like this, Julia decided to run our car through a car wash. She didn't know it would be a bad idea, and it was a bad idea because as she ran out of the car wash, she apparently ran over a bolt, and we had a flat tire, and she called me, could I come and do it? Well, when I got there, all the bolts are frozen to the deal, right, because she went through the car wash. And so I'm on my head trying to get the thing to break and try to get turned out breaking the bolt. And I guess I'm looking pretty mad and upset. And Julie goes, look at the bright side. A lot of people don't even have a truck. Which is true. Which is true. No question about it. There's a lot of people who don't have one. And what she was hoping, I think, when she said that was that I would just brighten right up. And it didn't have that effect on me. It didn't. And that's optimism. Look at the bright side, Look at the bright side. Sometimes Christians can do that in funerals without meaning to. A person's grieving and they're really upset. Hey, look at the bright side. They're in a better place. Hey, look at the bright side. They wouldn't come back now even if they could. And if what they're hoping out of that is for you to say, hey, you know what, you're right. Let's go get a Coke or something and talk about it. If that's what they're hoping for, well, that's crazy. There's a time to grieve, and Christian hope doesn't work like that. What Christian hope says is we know God's going to do good because he has done good in the past. And yeah, right now may be awful, but he's going to redeem this. And one day it'll all turn around. Job, in the middle of some terrible stuff in the Old Testament, says, even though my skin wastes away, I know that I will see him with my own eyes. I know my Redeemer lives, he says. He says, right now is awful, and he's grieving. If you read the book of Job, it's 40 chapters of grieving. He's in a terrible place. But I know that God will redeem this. Not happy about right now, but God will redeem this. That's what's going on here. When they see the star, when they see the baby, when they see this moment, God has his foot in the door. It's going to turn around. The seed is in the ground, the bread is in the oven. And when they came to the house, they saw the child and his mother Mary, and they bowed down and they worshiped him. And they took their treasures and they presented him with gifts of gold and incense and myrrh. I'll have the band come back up. I don't know for sure on this gold and incense and myrrh for 100% if they even knew totally what they were doing. But there's a lot of tradition about that too, that the gold is kind of for a king, right? And maybe they were thinking about that. And the incense is for priests. And maybe they were thinking about that. There's a divinity to it. And myrrh was often used for embalming. It was often used to cover the dead, to deal with the smell. And it was a thing that a rich person might use at a funeral. And so even with the myrrh, there's this notion of a sacrifice. And I don't know if these guys understood all that stuff. They may have. Probably what they understood was it's expensive. It was hard to get. It was an expensive gift. It wasn't enough. Everything we read about Jesus says he grew up poor, so this wasn't like $1 billion. It wasn't that much, but it was something precious, and it was meaningful, and it kind of shows that they got some inkling of what's happening, that this baby is going to change everything. All right, I'm going to have you stand up again, if you don't mind. We're going to sing a couple songs, and then I'll have you sit down again, and I'll finish up the sermon, and we'll be done. We three kings of glory and all, bearing gifts we travel afar, field and fountain, moor and mountain, following yonder star. Oh, star of wonder, star of night, star with royal beauty bright, westward leading, still proceeding.
incense on the deity night, your prayer and your praising.
I don't have a great voice for this one, so you're going to have to help. It'll be better for all of us if you help a lot. I promise. Oh, holy night, the stars are brightly shining. Power particular song was written just before the Civil War, and that line about the slave being our brother and all that, and all oppression shall cease, kind of a controversial line when it was written, kind of a controversial line when it was sung. But the whole agenda, again, was this light. That's what the whole agenda has always been. We're to put a light out there so people will see that God has come and that God has a plan and that plan is different than what we did before. The seed is in the ground, the bread's in the oven. You know, if you're in a dark room and it's completely dark and someone cracks a door open and there's light on the other side, that little bit of light comes into the room. It lights everything up enough that you can see what's going on. It's not well lit, just a crack in the door. It's enough that you can kind of see where things are at. You can kind of see how things are moving. And you have this hope that one day the door will be open and the whole room will be flooded with light and we'll be able to go over to that side, and that's coming, but right now it's just open a little bit. And we can see that thing, and that song is a little bit of that. You know, there's this time coming when the slave will be our brother and all oppression shall cease. And we're not there yet. We're still not there. All these years later, we're not where we want to be, but we can see it, and that's the dream. And when we see that star, that light in front of us, we're overjoyed. In John chapter 1, when John is talking about Jesus coming and giving this picture of what it'll be like when Jesus, when he comes, he uses this idea of light in the darkness. He says, through him all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that's been made. And in him was life, and that life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, but the darkness doesn't understand it. He says the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us, and we've seen his glory. The true light that gives light to every man was coming into the world. And that's what Jesus is. When Jesus talks about himself, he uses that language. He says, I'm the light of the world. And he tells us to be that way too. He says, you're the light of the world. And I want you to go out and let your light shine in such a way that people will see your good works and give praise to your Father in heaven. Paul takes that notion, that idea from Jesus, that idea of that command, and he says that we're supposed to shine like stars against a dark world as we hold out the word of life. And it's kind of an interesting picture that when we look at the sky and we can see stars horizon to horizon, that when God looks down here, that's what he hopes to see, us shining like stars against a dark world. And as we hold out the word of life, people might follow after us to know who Jesus is. That's always been the plan. It's a good plan. I know that some of you come today, and if you had your choice, you probably wouldn't have come to church today. There were presents to open, there was food to eat, there's football to watch. If you could have had your choice, you would have done something else this morning, and you only came because someone guilted you into doing it. And I know that, and I'm sorry, first of all, but glad you're here. I'm glad you're here. Get a donut on the way out; they're free. But I'm glad you're here. Who knows why you're here? But it may be that God has you here for something. May not be. I don't know. That's the weird thing about stars. I can be out in the night and I can see those things and they might not affect me at all. I can get so busy. They told me a couple of months ago, need to go out and watch. You know, there's a blood moon and you need to go see it. And there's this eclipse. You need to go check it out. You don't get to see it again till 2025. And I think I missed it. It just was hard to, I could have went out and looked at it. I could have, but it's hard and it's warm inside and I just didn't care. And so you don't do it, right? And this one thing, it may mean a lot to somebody else, doesn't mean anything to me. And I know that this could be the same way the other way. It means a lot to me, but it may not mean as much to everybody else. That's the way it works, and I know that. And I don't know why God chooses to whisper like that, but he does. And I have hope that because God has done the things he's already done, that one day he's going to make it all right. And that one day the people I've lost, I'll get to see them again. And that one day, all the different sacrifices that I've made in one time or another to try to put Christ first will be paid back 100-fold. And I'll wonder not only why I waited so long to sacrifice those things, but why I didn't sacrifice more. I think in that day, I'm going to see it all different for the first time, and I hunger for that. That moment when finally it'll all make sense. That's what Christian hope is. It's not just optimism. I believe that God will act because he always has acted, because he always has come through. Because of the revealed promise of Christmas, I can say quite confidently that you matter to God. It doesn't matter if you're poor or rich or male or female or insider, outsider. It doesn't matter who you know. It doesn't matter what you've done. You know, there's no good guys and bad guys. We're all bad guys. And he came to rescue all of us. He paid a debt that we couldn't pay. He paid a debt he didn't know that we did. And because of what he did, anybody can come in. A few years ago in Paris, the Notre Dame church burned. And I've never been to Paris. I've never been to Notre Dame. I don't know why it interested me when it happened like it did, but I remember watching it for long stretches just to watch and see what would happen next. And would they be able to get it out, and would they be able to fix it or not? I know it may have been a blip on your screen like that lunar eclipse. But for me, I remember one day watching it and worried about it, which is weird because, again, I've never been there. I've got no special thing. But it's an old building. It's 850 years old, and you know, it represents hundreds and thousands of lives that have went through, and people have made decisions and cared about things, and you just hate to see something like that go away. It's a landmark for the whole city. You know, people, and 500 pounds of wood up there in the roof and 250 pounds of lead, and all of it was wrecked and ruined, and what are we going to do? And afterward, lots of rich people all over the world pledged money to it. Hey, we'll help rebuild Notre Dame. Let's get that going. You know, we can't let that fall apart even for a day. And as far as I know, they're working on it night and day over there, trying to get it right. But it's just a building. And ultimately, what it represents is God's people all coming together. And that continued to go every week that Notre Dame is closed. You know, you're part of what builds up God's church. I'm grateful for this building this morning. It's cold out there, but it's not this building that redeems us. It's us being together, all after the same thing, all striving as hard as we can, all running to Him. And you may have come in here today and been on the outside, but you never have to stay on the outside with God. Everybody's always invited all the time. The seed is in the ground. The bread's in the oven. The door is ajar, and you can walk in. It's not locked anymore. That's what made those guys overjoyed. I don't know if they totally understood all of it. I don't know if they made any life changes, but this notion that God has not forgot us. God's not given up on us. The same God who holds the stars in His hands and can make them do whatever He wants to do has us in His hands. And every part of us is tied to Him. The Bible says that not even one hair of your head will fall to the ground without Him knowing about it. And God has such a heart for you. And when you come in here on Christmas, you may feel like you're at the end of your rope, but I hope that if I can only communicate one thing to you, it's that you know you're dearly loved by God. How do I know? Because He sent Jesus for you. How do I know that He loves you? Because He told you over and over again in all the different stories and the things that He did. How do I know that He cares? Because He laid His life down for you. Took nails in His hands and feet and a crown of thorns on His head, and could have gotten away from it, but believed that He had to do it for you. Well, how do I know He's not crazy? And He was saying those things and died for no reason, because He came back. If I'm going to be honest with you, I don't always have a lot of Christmas spirit. That's not really my strength. I know there's some people. Julia wants to watch all the Christmas movies every year. And I mean, we've watched, it's not an exaggeration to say we've watched between 10 and 15 Christmas movies. I'd have to think about how many we've watched, just one after another. And we know how they all work, right? We know ahead of time what's going to happen. We started a thing a couple days ago where she said, "I'll tell you what, tonight you can pick what we watch." And I did, and she put up with it. But she didn't like it, because it's the time to watch Christmas movies, and I just don't have a lot of that. I like when the grandkids come over; I get real revved up about that. But as far as me personally, you know, what am I going to get? Whatever. I'm paying for all of it, so I mean, a lot of the joy is gone. Especially in like high school and junior high, the kids would come to me to ask for money to buy my present. That's crazy. I'll just keep my own money. You know, thank you very much, and. So that's where I'm at, right? So I'll just confess that to you today. Some people see the Christmas trees and all that, and they just get like this thrill in their heart. And I used to, I did, but I don't as much anymore. And I bet I'm not the only one like that. I bet there's a few of you out there that feel that way also. And it's not that you're against it; it just doesn't do the same magic to you as it did when you were a kid. And I think that's okay. I hope it is. But I never, ever, ever, ever get tired of the main point of Christmas. God has not quit on us. God has not quit on you. He's not quit on you. And I don't know if you'll get just what you want. Have you been good all year? You may not get just what you want at Christmas. I don't know if you'll hear all the right songs or see all the right movies or get to see all the right people. But God is for you. And I hope that does something to your heart. Won't you stand up with us? I'm going to have the band come back up, and I'm going to pray. And I'm going to have Sophie start the next song when we get ready for it. Next two songs. But we're going to sing together, and at the end of the service here, if you need to pray, I'll have some people up in front here, and they can pray with you. And take advantage of this moment to call out to God if you need to.